On Rosemere Plantation, Isaiah hides a deadly secret. He can read. When a master's son discovers it, forbidden lessons ignite a bond that could change or destroy them all. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The summer heat beat down on Rosemere Plantation like God's own punishment. Isaiah wiped sweat from his brow as he brushed one of Colonel Wexley's prized horses. At 28, his strong hands moved with practiced care, his eyes always watching, always careful. "Steady now," he whispered to the mare. "No need to fuss." Isaiah had been at Rosemere for 11 years now, sold away from his mother and everything he'd known when he was just 17. He kept his head down, did his work, and survived each day. But he carried a dangerous secret, one that could get him killed. Isaiah could read and write. His mother had taught him in whispered lessons under moonlight, using sticks in dirt and scraps of paper hidden from the masters. When they caught her teaching other slaves, children, they hanged her. Isaiah watched, 16 years old, and unable to do anything but remember her final words. "Keep the letters alive inside you." The stable door creaked open, and Isaiah quickly dropped his eyes. It was young Thomas Wexley, the mistress's 10-year-old son, pale and thin as a reed. "Mama says I need fresh air," Thomas said, his voice soft and unsure. "She says I spend too much time in bed." Isaiah nodded respectfully. "Yes, young master." "What's that horse's name?" Thomas asked, coming closer. "This here's Magnolia," Isaiah answered, continuing his brushing. The boy watched in silence for a while. "You're different from the others," he finally said. Isaiah's heart skipped. "How's that, young master?" "You look at things longer, like you're reading them." Isaiah's hand paused on the brush. He chose his words carefully. "Just doing my work, sir." "I hate reading lessons," Thomas confessed suddenly. "Mr. Peterson comes from Charleston once a week, but he smells like onions and gets angry when I can't remember the letters." Isaiah remained silent, knowing any response could be dangerous. "Can I help brush her?" Thomas asked. "If Mistress Caroline finds out." "She won't. She's having her afternoon rest." "She always does." Isaiah hesitated, then handed the boy the brush. "Gentle strokes like this." For an hour, Thomas stayed in the stable, asking questions about the horses. Isaiah answered politely but briefly. When the dinner bell rang at the main house, Thomas reluctantly left. That night, after his work was done, Isaiah sat alone behind the stable. With a stick, he traced letters in the dirt, a private ritual to keep his mother's gift alive. "A, B, C," he whispered. "What are you doing?" Isaiah jumped to his feet, heart pounding. Thomas stood there in his nightshirt, eyes wide with curiosity. "Nothing, young master. You shouldn't be out here this late." "Those are letters," Thomas said, pointing to the dirt. "You know how to write." Isaiah quickly erased the marks with his foot. "No, sir. Just making marks is all." "You're lying," Thomas said, but not accusingly. "You can write better than Mr. Peterson can. I saw you." "Young master, please. Teach me," Thomas said suddenly. Isaiah stepped back. "Sir, you know that's not allowed. It's against the law for a slave to." The next day, Thomas appeared in the stable again, and the next. On the fourth day, he brought a small piece of cake wrapped in a napkin. "I saved it for you," he said. Isaiah looked around nervously before accepting it. "Thank you, young master. Will you please teach me?" Thomas asked again. "Just a little." Isaiah thought of his mother, of her belief that letters were seeds of freedom in the mind. He thought of the risk, death if he was caught. But something in the boy's earnest face broke through his caution. "Meet me here after sundown," Isaiah said quietly. "Don't let anyone see you." That night, with his heart hammering against his ribs, Isaiah drew an A in the dirt. "This here's the first letter," he whispered. "It makes the sound an apple and ask." Thomas traced it with his finger, concentrating hard. "A," he repeated. They continued through several letters before Isaiah sent him back to the house. As he watched the boy leave, Isaiah wondered if he'd just signed his own death warrant. Over the next few weeks, their secret lessons continued. Isaiah taught Thomas the alphabet using dirt, ash, and eventually small scraps of paper that Thomas smuggled from the house. The boy was a quick learner, eager and grateful. "Where did you learn to read?" Thomas asked one evening as they sat hidden behind a haystack. Isaiah hesitated. My mama taught me. Before I came here. What happened to her? She died, Isaiah said flatly, unwilling to share the painful truth. My real mama died too, Thomas confided. When I was born, Caroline is my father's second wife. She doesn't really like me. Isaiah didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't his place to comment on white folks' family matters. Why is it against the law for slaves to read? Thomas asked another night. Isaiah took a deep breath. They say it gives us dangerous ideas. Does it? Knowledge is never dangerous, young master. Only what people choose to do with it. As summer turned to fall, Thomas's reading improved dramatically. He could recognize most letters and was beginning to sound out simple words. But their secret was becoming harder to keep. One evening, Elias, another enslaved man who worked in the fields, caught Isaiah showing Thomas how to write his name. You lost your mind? Elias hissed later that night in the slave quarters. Teaching the master's boy? They'll hang you same as they did your mama. Isaiah's blood ran cold. How do you know about my mama? Word travels, even between plantations, Elias said. I know she taught reading and they killed her for it. Now you're doing the same fool thing. He's just a boy, Isaiah argued. He needs help. He's a white boy, Elias countered. And one day he'll own all this, including you. Don't forget that. Isaiah couldn't sleep that night, Elias's warning echoing in his mind. The next day, Colonel Wexley returned from his business in Charleston. The entire plantation tensed at his arrival. The colonel was known for his temper and strict discipline. Father wants to see my progress with Mr. Peterson tomorrow, Thomas whispered anxiously during their lesson. I am scared, Isaiah. You know more than you think, Isaiah encouraged him. Just take your time with the letters. Will you pray for me? Thomas asked. Isaiah was surprised. You want my prayers? Mama says God doesn't listen to children, but maybe he'll listen to you. God hears everybody the same, Isaiah said, though he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. But I'll pray for you just the same. The next day, Isaiah watched nervously from the stables as Mr. Peterson's carriage arrived. Hours later, Thomas came running across the yard, his face lit up with excitement. I did it, he exclaimed. Father said I've improved. Isaiah smiled despite his worry. That's good, young master. Mr. Peterson was surprised too. He asked who's been helping me. Isaiah's smile vanished. What did you say? I said I've been practicing by myself, Thomas assured him. I didn't tell on you, I promise. But that evening, as Isaiah finished his work, Caroline Wexley appeared at the stable door. Her thin face was pinched with suspicion, her eyes cold as she looked him over. My son has suddenly become quite good at his letters, she said. Isn't that interesting? Isaiah kept his eyes on the ground. Yes, ma'am. He never leaves the house except to come here, she continued, her voice dangerously soft. To see the horses. To see you. I just tend to the animals, ma'am. Caroline stepped closer. If I find out you've been filling his head with anything at all, I'll have you whipped until there's nothing left. Do you understand me? Yes, ma'am, Isaiah said, his mouth dry. He's not your concern. He's mine. She turned to leave, then paused. The colonel will be watching you now. After she left, Isaiah sank onto a bale of hay, his hands shaking. He'd known this was dangerous from start. But now it wasn't just his life at risk. It was also the fragile trust that had grown between him and Thomas. That night, he decided the lessons had to stop. It wasn't worth the risk. When Thomas slipped into the stable the next evening, Isaiah told him they couldn't continue. But why? Thomas asked, his eyes filling with tears. Did I do something wrong? No, young master. But your mama suspects something, and it's not safe. I need you, Thomas pleaded. Mr. Peterson doesn't teach me like you do. He doesn't explain things. I'm sorry, Isaiah said firmly. We can't. Thomas ran from his stable in tears. Isaiah felt terrible, but knew he'd made the right decision. 3 days passed. Isaiah threw himself into his work, trying not to think about Thomas or their lessons. On the 4th day, as a heavy rain fell outside, the stable door opened. Isaiah expected it to be Thomas again, but instead, Caroline Wexley stood there, soaking wet and looking strangely vulnerable. My son hasn't eaten in 3 days, she said without preamble. He says he won't until his reading teacher comes back. Isaiah froze, unsure how to respond. He told me everything, Caroline continued, her voice tight. About your lessons. About how you've been teaching him when that expensive Charleston tutor couldn't. This was it, Isaiah thought. She would call the overseer now. He would be whipped or worse. Instead, Caroline said something that shocked him to his core. I want you to continue teaching him. Isaiah stared at her, certain he'd misheard. But ma'am, it's against the law for a slave to... I know the law, she snapped. But I also know my son is finally learning, and I won't let him. She paused, composing herself. Colonel Wexley expects results. If Thomas doesn't improve, he's threatening to send him to boarding school in the North. Isaiah understood now. This wasn't about Thomas's education. It was about Caroline's fear of losing her son. You'll teach him, she continued, but under my supervision. In the house. In the evening room, where I can watch what you're filling his head with. Yes, ma'am, Isaiah said, still stunned by this turn of events. If anyone asks, you're simply there to tend the fire and serve refreshments during the boys' independent study time. Nothing more. Understand, ma'am. Caroline's eyes narrowed. And Isaiah, if you teach him anything beyond basic letters and numbers, anything at all about ideas that don't concern him, I'll sell you so far south you'll forget what a cool breeze feels like. With that, she turned and walked back into the rain, leaving Isaiah to wonder if this new arrangement was a blessing or a trap. That night, as he lay on his thin mattress in the slave quarters, Isaiah thought about his mother. What would she say about him teaching the master's son? About the mistress knowing and allowing it? He couldn't decide if he was betraying his mother's memory or honoring it. Lord, he whispered into the darkness, show me the right path. The next evening, Isaiah was escorted to the main house by the overseer. He'd never been inside before, and the grandeur of it, the polished wood, the gleaming silver, the soft carpets, made him acutely aware of the mud on his shoes and the coarseness of his clothes. In the evening room, Thomas sat at a small desk, his face lighting up when Isaiah entered. Caroline sat nearby with her needlework, watching them closely. Remember, she said coldly, you are here to assist with his independent study. Nothing more. But as Isaiah began to quietly guide Thomas through his letters, he felt something shift in the room. Caroline's needle slowed as she listened to Isaiah's patient explanations. Her eyes lingered on her son's eager face, perhaps seeing him truly engage for the first time. And in that moment, though none of them realized it yet, something dangerous and inevitable had been set in motion, something that would change all their lives forever. 2 weeks passed, and the evening lessons became a strange new routine. Each night, at 8 o'clock, Isaiah would be escorted to the main house. Caroline would sit with her embroidery, watching like a hawk as he guided Thomas through his letters and simple words. At first, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Caroline rarely spoke, except to correct Thomas's posture or remind him to speak clearly. Isaiah kept his eyes down, his voice soft, aware that one wrong word could end everything. Sound it out, Isaiah encouraged as Thomas struggled with a difficult word. What's the first letter sound like? CC cat, Thomas said. CAT cat. A small smile appeared on Isaiah's face before he could stop it. That's right. Now try the next one. From her chair by the fire, Caroline watched them. Her eyes narrowed at Isaiah's smile, but she said nothing. As the days went by, Thomas's progress was remarkable. He devoured every lesson, practicing his letters during the day and proudly showing Isaiah his work each evening. Look what I did, he said one night, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. It was a simple sentence. The horse runs fast. This is very good, Isaiah said, careful not to show too much pride in the boy's work with Caroline watching. Did I spell everything right? Thomas asked eagerly. Almost. Horse has an E at the end. Thomas frowned. Why? You don't say the... English has strange rules, Isaiah explained. Sometimes letters are silent, but they're still there. Like people, Thomas said thoughtfully. Sometimes they're silent, but they're still there. Isaiah glanced nervously at Caroline, worried the boy's comment might anger her. But instead, She was looking at her son with a strange expression, almost surprised, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. That night, as Isaiah was preparing to leave, Caroline spoke directly to him for the first time since the lessons began. "Where did you learn to read?" she asked, her voice cool but curious. Isaiah hesitated. "My mother taught me, ma'am." "And where is she now?" Isaiah swallowed hard. "She passed on, ma'am." Caroline studied him for a moment. "Tomorrow, bring a Bible verse for Thomas to practice. Something appropriate." "Yes, ma'am." As the overseer led him back to the slave quarters, Isaiah's mind raced. Why would she request a Bible verse? Was it a test? Or was she genuinely interested in Thomas's education? When he entered the cramped cabin he shared with 4 other men, Elias was waiting for him. "You're playing with fire," Elias warned. "Go to the big house every night. People are talking." "I'm just doing what I was told," Isaiah replied, lying down on his thin mattress. "The field hands are saying you're getting special treatment. And Mabel from the kitchen says the mistress watches you more than she watches the boy." Isaiah turned to face the wall. "That's not true." "Be careful," Elias said. "You think you're lifting that boy up, but you're only digging your own grave." The next day, Colonel Wexley returned from another trip. The entire plantation tensed at his arrival, as it always did. Isaiah kept his head down, working twice as hard to avoid drawing attention. That evening, when he arrived for Thomas's lesson, Caroline seemed agitated. "The colonel is home," she said. "He's in his study now, but he could come in at any moment. We'll need to be quick tonight." Isaiah nodded, understanding the danger. He took out the Bible verse he had carefully chosen. "The truth shall make you free." Thomas read it slowly but correctly. "What does it mean?" he asked. Before Isaiah could answer, Caroline cut in. "It means that honesty is always the best path." She gave Isaiah a pointed look. "Isn't that right?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "Truth is important." "What other truths should I know?" Thomas asked innocently. The question hung in the air like a thundercloud. Isaiah knew that Caroline was watching him, testing him. "The truth that your mama wants you to be a good, educated boy," Isaiah said carefully, "and that you're learning fast." Caroline's shoulders relaxed slightly. The lesson continued without incident, and when it was time for Isaiah to leave, she nodded her approval. "Same time tomorrow," she said. But as Isaiah was walking out, Colonel Wexley stepped into the hallway. He was a tall man with cold eyes and a carefully trimmed beard. He looked at Isaiah with surprise and suspicion. "What's this slave doing in a house at this hour?" he demanded. Caroline appeared behind Isaiah, her face composed. "He was fixing the fire in the evening room. Thomas and I were reading, and it got cold." The colonel's eyes narrowed. "I don't want him in the house after dark. Use one of the houseboys for that." "Isaiah knows how to build a proper fire without smoke," Caroline said smoothly. "The others leave the room filled with smoke, and you know how Thomas's chest gets." Colonel Wexley looked unconvinced but didn't press further. "Get back to your quarters," he said to Isaiah. "Yes, master," Isaiah replied, keeping his eyes down as he left. The next evening, Isaiah wasn't called to the main house, nor the next. 3 days passed, and Isaiah began to think the lessons were over. He told himself it was for the best. The risk had always been too great. But he couldn't help feeling a pang of loss when he thought of Thomas's eager face as he mastered new word. On the 4th day, as Isaiah was cleaning the stable, Thomas appeared. "Papa left this morning," he said breathlessly. "Gone to Charleston again. Mama says you can come back tonight." Relief washed over Isaiah, followed immediately by caution. "Is it safe?" "Mama says yes. She told everyone you're helping me with my studies because Mr. Peterson is sick and can't come from Charleston." That evening, when Isaiah arrived at the house, things were different. Caroline had set up a proper table with paper, ink, and books. Thomas had his own chair, and there was even a simple stool for Isaiah, a small dignity he hadn't been afforded before. "While the colonel is away," Caroline explained, "we'll make the most of this time. Thomas needs to improve quickly." The lessons resumed with new intensity. Caroline no longer pretended to focus on her needlework. Instead, she watched closely, occasionally asking questions about Isaiah's teaching methods. Why do you have him sound out the letters that way? She asked one evening. It helps him remember the shapes and sounds together, Isaiah explained, then added hastily, ma'am. And where did you learn that technique? Isaiah hesitated. My mother. She taught children before. He stopped, not wanting to say the words. Before what? Caroline pressed. Before she died, ma'am. Caroline studied him. She must have been an educated woman. She learned from her mistress, who was kind to her, Isaiah said softly, until she was caught teaching others. The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Thomas looked up from his writing, his young face troubled. What happened when she was caught? He asked innocently. Isaiah looked at Caroline, unsure how to answer. Sometimes, Caroline said carefully, people are punished for doing things that shouldn't be punishments at all. She seemed surprised by her own words. That night marked a subtle shift. Caroline began to ask Isaiah more questions, not just about teaching methods, but about his thoughts on the Bible verses they used for Thomas's lessons. What do you think this means? She asked once, pointing to a passage about forgiveness. Isaiah chose his words with care. I think it means that holding on to anger hurts us more than the person we're angry with. Interesting, she said, and for a moment, their eyes met directly. Something unspoken passed between them before she quickly looked away. As the weeks passed, Thomas flourished under Isaiah's guidance. He was reading simple books now and writing short sentences on his own. But more than that, he was asking questions about the world, about history, about right and wrong. Why are some people slaves and some people free? He asked one evening. The question landed like a stone in still water. Caroline's head snapped up, and Isaiah froze. That's not an appropriate question, Thomas, Caroline said sharply. But why? Thomas persisted. Isaiah is smarter than Mr. Peterson. Why is Mr. Peterson free and Isaiah isn't? Thomas, enough. Caroline's voice was tight with anger and something else, perhaps fear. It's just the way things are, Isaiah said gently. Now, let's get back to your reading. Later, as Thomas was practicing his writing, Caroline motioned for Isaiah to join her by the window, out of the boy's earshot. You're filling his head with dangerous ideas, she accused in a whisper. No, ma'am, Isaiah said. Children ask questions naturally. I never suggested anything. He never questioned things like this before. Reading opens minds, ma'am. It can't be helped. Caroline looked troubled. You must be careful. If the colonel heard him asking such things. Her concern seemed genuine, which surprised Isaiah. For the first time, he wondered if she might care about more than just keeping Thomas at home. Understand, ma'am, he said. She studied his face for a moment. You're different than I expected, she admitted. You speak like an educated man. I just speak as myself, ma'am. A small smile touched her lips before she caught herself and returned to her usual stern expression. Back to the lesson. Word of the unusual arrangement began to spread throughout the plantation. House slaves whispered about Isaiah's nightly visits to the main house. Field hands watched with suspicion as he was escorted back and forth each evening. Mistress stays up late with him, they whispered. She asked him questions. That ain't just a lesson anymore. Elias warned Isaiah again. People are jealous, and jealous people are dangerous. Nothing is happening, Isaiah insisted. I'm just teaching the boy. It don't matter what's happening. It matters what people think is happening. One evening, as the lesson was ending, Caroline asked Isaiah to stay behind after Thomas went to bed. I need your help with something, she said once they were alone. Isaiah stood uncomfortably, wondering what she could possibly want from him. Thomas mentioned that you told him stories about Africa, she said. Stories your mother told you. Isaiah tensed. Just simple tales, ma'am, like fables with animals. I'd like to hear one, she said, gesturing to the chair opposite hers. Isaiah didn't move. Mom. Sit, she said, and then, noticing his hesitation, added, please. Cautiously, Isaiah sat on the edge of the chair, keeping his posture rigid. Tell me one of these stories, Caroline said. Isaiah chose a simple story about a tortoise and a bird who became unlikely friends. As he spoke, Caroline listened intently, her face softening in the firelight. Your mother must have been a remarkable woman, she said when he finished. She was, ma'am. And what would she think of you now, teaching a white child in the master's house? Isaiah considered the question. She believed knowledge belonged to everyone. That teaching was a way of keeping hope alive. Caroline's eyes seemed to glisten in the firelight. I never knew my mother, she confessed suddenly. She died when I was born, just like Thomas's real mother. Isaiah didn't know how to respond to such a personal revelation. That's why I married the colonel, she continued. I had no family, no money of my own. He offered security. She looked away, but not much else. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 10 times, breaking the strange intimacy of the moment. It's late, Caroline said, standing abruptly. You should go. As Isaiah was leaving, she called after him. Thank you for the story. Perhaps tomorrow you could tell another. Isaiah nodded, confused by her sudden openness. Yes, ma'am. The next day, as Isaiah was working in the stables, Thomas came running in, his face flushed with excitement. Isaiah, Mama says you're to come to dinner tonight. Isaiah stared at the boy in disbelief. To dinner? In the house. Not in the dining room, Thomas clarified. In the kitchen. But after, you'll teach me, and then Mama wants to hear more of your stories. Isaiah's stomach knotted with anxiety. This was dangerous territory. Sharing a meal, telling stories, these were things equals did, not masters and slaves. I don't think that's a good idea, young master. But Mama insisted, Thomas said, confused by Isaiah's reluctance. She said you've been working hard and deserve a proper meal. That evening, Isaiah found himself sitting at the kitchen table, serve a plate of the same food the family had eaten. The house slaves gave him strange looks as they went about their duties. After dinner, the usual lesson took place, but there was a different atmosphere in the room. Caroline seemed more relaxed, occasionally offering a comment or question. Thomas was animated, proud to show his progress. When Thomas went to bed, Caroline once again asked Isaiah to stay. Another story, perhaps, she suggested. This time, Isaiah told a more complex tale about a village that overcame a drought by working together. As he spoke, he noticed Caroline watching him intently, not just listening to his words, but studying his face, his hands, his expressions. You have a gift, she said when he finished. Not just for teaching, but for storytelling. Thank you, ma'am. Caroline, she said suddenly. Isaiah looked at her in shock. Mom, when we're alone like this, you may call me Caroline. She seemed as surprised by her words as he was. It seems silly to stand on formality when we're just talking. Isaiah knew he should refuse, knew it was dangerous for both of them. But something in her eyes, something lonely and searching, made him nod. Thank you, Caroline. The sound of her name and his voice changed something in the air between them. For a moment, they weren't mistress and slave, but simply a man and a woman, sitting by firelight, sharing stories. The evening ended awkwardly, both of them suddenly aware of the line they'd crossed. As Isaiah left, Caroline touched his arm briefly. Tomorrow night, she said softly. Same time. Walking back to the slave quarters, Isaiah's mind was in turmoil. What was happening? What did Caroline want from him? And why was he willing to risk everything to find out? Elias was waiting up for him, his face grave in the dim light of their cabin. You were at the big house for 3 hours, he said. People are talking even more now. I'm just teaching the boy, Isaiah repeated, but the words sounded hollow even to him. The overseer's watching you, Elias warned. And he answers to the colonel, not the mistress. Isaiah lay awake most of the night, thinking about Caroline's face in the firelight, the sound of his name on her lips, and the dangerous path they were walking. The next morning, as Isaiah was drawing water from the well, he noticed the overseer watching him from a distance. The man's eyes were cold, suspicious. Isaiah quickly finished his task and returned to the stables, feeling the weight of that gaze on his back. Later that day, a messenger arrived from Charleston. Colonel Wexley would be returning the following afternoon, a day earlier than expected. When Isaiah arrived at the main house that evening, Caroline was pacing nervously. The colonel will be home tomorrow, she said without preamble. These lessons, our conversations, they must remain our secret. Of course, Isaiah assured her. Thomas knows not to speak of it, she continued. But children forget themselves. If the colonel asks you anything at all, you must deny everything. Say you only tend to fires when asked. Nothing more. I understand. The lesson that night was tense, Caroline jumping at every sound from outside. Thomas sensed the mood and was quieter than usual, making mistakes in his reading. I'm sorry, he said, close to tears after struggling with a simple word. I'm trying. Isaiah placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. It's all right. Everyone has difficult days. Caroline watched this small gesture of comfort, her expression unreadable. When Thomas went to bed, she didn't ask Isaiah to stay for a story. Instead, she walked into the back door herself. After tomorrow, we'll need to be more careful, she said. The colonel is suspicious by nature. Perhaps it would be safer to stop the lessons entirely, Isaiah suggested. Caroline looked stricken. No, Thomas needs you. She hesitated, then added softly, and I've come to value our conversations. Before Isaiah could respond, she did something that shocked him to his core. She reached out and touched his hand, her fingers lightly brushing against his. Good night, Isaiah, she whispered, and closed the door between them. Isaiah stood frozen, staring at the closed door, his hand tingling where she had touched it. In that moment, he knew with terrible clarity that Elias was right. He wasn't just teaching a boy to read anymore. He was falling into something far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. Colonel Wexley's return brought an immediate chill to Rosemere Plantation. His deep voice echoed through the main house, his heavy boots sending servants scurrying out of his path. Isaiah kept his distance, focusing on his stable work and avoiding the main house entirely. 2 days passed without a summons for lessons. Isaiah told himself it was for the best, but he couldn't stop thinking about Caroline's touch on his hand, or the way Thomas's face lit up when he mastered a new word. On the third evening after the colonel's return, Thomas sneaked out to the stable. Papa's going to a dinner at the neighboring plantation tonight, he whispered excitedly. Mama says you can come after dark. Use the back door. Isaiah's heart raced. Are you sure it's safe? Mama says Papa won't be back until very late. Please come. I've been practicing my letters. Against his better judgment, Isaiah agreed. That night, he slipped through the shadows to the main house, knocking softly at the back door as instructed. Caroline opened it herself, surprising him. She was dressed simply, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual tight arrangement. Come in quickly, she said, glancing nervously at the darkness behind him. Thomas was waiting in the evening room, practically bouncing with excitement. Look what I wrote, he said, thrusting a paper into Isaiah's hands. It was a short story about a horse that could fly. The spelling was imperfect, but the words flowed naturally, showing how far Thomas had come. This is wonderful, Isaiah said, genuinely impressed. You've been practicing hard. Mama helped me with some of the harder words, Thomas said proudly. Isaiah glanced at Caroline, who smiled shyly. I'm learning along with him, she admitted. The lesson that night was different. With the colonel away, Caroline sat closer to the table, actively participating. The three of them took turns reading from a simple book of fables, laughing together when Thomas dramatically acted out the voice of a fox character. For a brief moment, it felt almost normal, almost like a family sharing stories by firelight. The thought sent a jolt through Isaiah's chest. This wasn't normal. This wasn't safe. When Thomas went to bed, Caroline didn't immediately send Isaiah away. Instead, she poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to him. Sit with me, she said softly. Isaiah hesitated, but took the chair across from her. The tea was sweet and fragrant, nothing like the bitter, weak brew the slaves made from used leaves. Why do you look so troubled? Caroline asked. This is dangerous, Isaiah said, keeping his voice low. If the colonel found out, he won't. He never pays attention to what happens in this house unless it directly affects him. Bitterness crept in her voice. I'm just the woman who keeps his house and raised his son. Thomas is a good boy, Isaiah said. You've done well with him. Caroline's eyes softened. He's different since you started teaching him. Happier, more confident. She looked down at her tea. He said something to me yesterday that I can't stop thinking about. What's that? He said you treat him more like a son than his father ever has. She looked up, meeting Isaiah's eyes directly. Is that true? Do you care about him? Isaiah knew he should be careful, but the honesty in her eyes drew out his own truth. Yes, he reminded me of myself at that age. Curious, eager to learn. And me? Caroline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you think of me? The question hung in the air between them, dangerous and impossible to answer truthfully. Before Isaiah could respond, they heard a sound that made them both freeze, the front door opening, followed by heavy footsteps in the hall. The Colonel, Caroline whispered, her face draining of color. He wasn't supposed to return until morning. Isaiah stood quickly, looking for somewhere to hide, but it was too late. The door to the evening room swung open, and Colonel Wexley stood there, his face darkening as he took in the scene before him. His wife and a slave, sitting together by the fire, teacups in hand. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, his voice deadly quiet. Caroline rose to her feet. Abram, you're home early. Isaiah was just. I can see what he was doing. The Colonel cut her off. Sitting in my house, drinking from my china, talking to my wife as if he belonged here. It's not what you think, Caroline insisted. He was helping with Thomas's studies. The Colonel's eyes narrowed. Studies? His slave? Have you lost your mind, woman? Thomas has improved dramatically under his guidance. Mr. Peterson even commented on it last month. You've been allowing this for a month? The Colonel's voice rose dangerously. Behind my back? Isaiah kept his eyes on the floor, his heart pounding. He knew what was coming. Abram, please, Caroline pleaded. The boy needs proper discipline, not the teachings of slave, the Colonel roared. He turned to Isaiah. Get out of my house. Report to the overseer in the morning. Isaiah didn't move, afraid to turn his back on the angry man. I said get out, the Colonel shouted, grabbing a heavy book from the table and hurling it at Isaiah. Isaiah dodged it and backed toward the door, his eyes finally meeting Caroline's. Her face was a mask of fear and regret. As he stepped into the hallway, he heard the Colonel's voice drop to a menacing growl. As for you, Caroline, we will discuss your betrayal in private. Isaiah hurried out of the house, sick with worry, not for himself, though he knew punishment awaited him, but for Caroline. The sound of raised voices followed him into the night. Back in the slave quarters, Elias was waiting for him. What happened? He asked, taking in Isaiah's agitated state. The Colonel came home early. Found me in the house with the mistress. Elias closed his eyes briefly. Lord have mercy. What did he say? To report to the overseer in the morning. The whipping post, Elias said grimly. You know that's what's coming. Isaiah nodded. He'd seen men whipped before, some so badly they didn't survive. He'd been lucky to avoid the lash himself until now. Maybe you should run, Elias suggested, his voice low. Tonight, I can create a distraction. Isaiah considered it. The woods beyond Rosemere led eventually to the swamps, where runaway slaves sometimes found temporary shelter, but few made it all the way to freedom in the north. No, Isaiah finally said. Running means never stopping, and it puts everyone here at risk. The Colonel's fury won't stop at a simple whipping, Elias warned. Not when it involved his wife. The truth of this settled like a stone in Isaiah's stomach. But still, he couldn't bring himself to run. Not with Thomas's innocent face in his mind. Not with the memory of Caroline's touch still warm on his skin. Morning came too soon. The overseer, a cruel man named Barnett, came for Isaiah at dawn. Colonel wants to see you, he said with a smirk. Seems you've been getting above yourself. Isaiah was marched to the Colonel's study, a room he'd never entered before. The walls were lined with books, hundreds of them, more than Isaiah had ever seen. The irony wasn't lost on him. A house full of knowledge that slaves were forbidden to access. Colonel Wexley sat behind a massive desk, his face like thunder. He didn't speak for a long moment, just stared at Isaiah with cold contempt. You dare to come into my house, he finally said, and corrupt my wife and son with your presumption? Isaiah remained silent, knowing anything he said would only make things worse. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think you could turn my family against me? No, sir, Isaiah managed. Thomas tells me you've been teaching him to read. The colonel's voice was dangerously calm now. That my wife has been allowing it, encouraging it even. Isaiah's heart sank. Poor Thomas had probably been frightened into confessing everything. What else have you been teaching them, boy? Ideas about equality? About freedom? No, sir. Just letters and simple words. The colonel stood abruptly, coming around the desk. Do you know what happens to slaves who teach others to read in South Carolina? Isaiah knew. His mother's face flashed before his eyes. Yes, sir. Death would be the legal punishment, the colonel said, circling Isaiah slowly. But I'm not going to kill you. That would be too quick, too merciful. He stopped in front of Isaiah, his face inches away. Instead, I'm going to make an example of you. 20 lashes today, and then I'm selling you to a trader heading to the sugar plantations in Louisiana. Isaiah couldn't help the small gasp that escaped him. The sugar plantations were notorious, places where slaves were worked to death in brutal conditions. Few lasted more than a couple of years there. Please, sir, Isaiah said, breaking his silence. The boy needs his education. He's bright and eager to learn. My son will learn from proper teachers, the colonel shouted, not from an uppity slave who doesn't know his place. A knock at the door interrupted them. The overseer poked his head in. Everything's ready, Colonel. Colonel Wexley nodded sharply. Take him to the post. I want everyone to watch. The whipping post stood in the center of the plantation yard, where all could see. By the time Isaiah was led there, word had spread, and the other slaves had been forced to gather. Their faces were grim, eyes downcast, knowing they were powerless to help. Isaiah's shirt was torn from his back, his hands tied to the post above his head. He closed his eyes, preparing himself for the pain to come. Begin, the colonel's voice commanded. The first lash tore across Isaiah's back like fire. He bit his lip to keep from crying out, determined to face his punishment with dignity. The second lash fell, and the third, each one worse than the last. Through the haze of pain, Isaiah heard a commotion. Opening his eyes, he saw Thomas running across the yard, Caroline chasing after him. Stop it! Stop hurting him! Thomas screamed, tears streaming down his face. Take the boy inside, the colonel ordered harshly. No. Thomas fought against the house servant who tried to grab him. Isaiah didn't do anything wrong. He just taught me to read. Like you wanted. Thomas, please, Caroline begged, catching up to her son. Her face was pale, a bruise darkening one cheek. Come inside. You're hurting him because he's smart. Thomas shouted at his father. Because he's smarter than you. The colonel's face contorted with rage. Get that boy inside now, he roared. Caroline grabbed Thomas, who was still screaming and struggling. As she dragged him toward the house, her eyes met Isaiah's. The pain and regret he saw there cut deeper than any whip. Continue, the colonel ordered, and the lash fell again. Isaiah lost count after 12. The world narrowed to nothing but pain and the sound of his own labored breathing. When it finally stopped, he was barely conscious, his back a mass of torn flesh. Cut him down, he heard the colonel say, as if from a great distance. Lock him in the storage shed until the trader arrives tomorrow. Rough hands untied him, and Isaiah collapsed to the ground. He was dimly aware of being dragged across the yard, then tossed into the darkness of the storage shed. The door slammed shut, and he was alone with his pain. Hours passed in a blur. Isaiah drifted in and out of consciousness, his back on fire, his mouth dry with thirst. Night fell, bringing some relief from the heat, but no comfort for his wounds. Sometime in the darkest hours, he heard the shed door creak open. Expecting the overseer, he was shocked to see Caroline slip inside, a lantern in one hand and a bundle in the other. Isaiah, she whispered, kneeling beside him. Can you hear me? You shouldn't be here, he managed, his voice hoarse. I had to come. She set down the lantern and opened the bundle, revealing a water jug, clean cloths, and a jar of salve. Let me help you. With gentle hands, she helped him drink, then began cleaning his wounds. Each touch sent waves of pain through him, but he bit back his cries. I'm so sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. This is all my fault. No, Isaiah said. I knew the risk. The colonel is sending you away tomorrow. To Louisiana. Her voice broke. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. How is Thomas? Devastated. He blames himself. She paused in her ministrations. He said something tonight that nearly broke my heart. He said, Isaiah is the only one who treats me like I matter. Despite his pain, Isaiah felt a swell of affection for the boy. He matters, more than he knows. Caroline finished applying the salve and sat back on her heels. In the lantern light, the bruise on her face was stark against her pale skin. Did he hurt you badly? Isaiah asked, raising a hand toward her face, but stopping short of touching her. It's nothing I haven't endured before, she said, a bitterness in her voice that spoke volumes. They sat in silence for a moment, the reality of their situation settling around them like a shroud. Tomorrow, Isaiah would be gone, sold to a fate arguably worse than death. Thomas would lose his teacher and friend, and Caroline would remain trapped in her gilded cage, with a husband who treated her as property just as surely as he did his slaves. I should have run when I had the chance, Isaiah said softly. No, Caroline said firmly. No more regrets. We have to think of now, of tomorrow. There is no tomorrow for me, not here. Caroline's eyes suddenly sharpened with determination. What if there was? What if you could get away tonight? Isaiah looked at her in surprise. What are you saying? I'm saying I could help you escape. She leaned closer, her voice urgent. The colonel took laudanum for his back pain. He'll sleep deeply until morning. The overseer is drinking in his cabin, as he does every night. Even if I could get away from Rosemere, where would I go? How far would I get, injured as I am? North, Caroline said simply. To freedom. The word hung in the air between them, tantalizing and seemingly impossible. I have money, Caroline continued. Not much, but enough to help you get started. And I know people in Charleston who might help. A shopkeeper who once helped my cousin's slave get to Pennsylvania. Isaiah stared at her, hardly daring to believe what she was suggesting. Why would you risk everything for me? Caroline's eyes filled with tears again. Because you showed me something I'd forgotten existed. Kindness. Dignity. She hesitated, then added in a whisper, and because when you look at me, you really see me. Not as the colonel's wife or Thomas's mother, but as Caroline. Something shifted between them in that moment. An acknowledgement of feelings neither had dared to name. If I go, Isaiah said slowly, what about Thomas? I'll protect him, Caroline promised. And I'll continue what you started. I'll teach him, not just letters, but the truths you would have taught him. And you? What will happen to you when the colonel discovers I'm gone? I'll say you broke out in the night, that I knew nothing. She touched his hand gently. I've become very good at lying to my husband. Isaiah looked down at her small, pale hand resting on his dark one. The contrast was stark, a visual reminder of all the barriers between them, barriers that could never truly be crossed in this time and place. Come with me, he said suddenly, surprising himself as much as her. You and Thomas. We could all go north together. Caroline's eyes widened. For a moment, he could see her imagining it. A different life, a fresh start. Then reality settled back in her face. He would hunt us to the ends of the earth, she said softly. A runaway slave is one thing. His wife and son is another. She was right, and they both knew it. The colonel's pride would never allow such a public humiliation to stand. Then I'll go alone, Isaiah said, making his decision. And I'll pray for you both every day. Caroline nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. We need to hurry. Can you walk? With her help, Isaiah managed to get to his feet, swaying with pain and weakness. Caroline handed him a clean shirt from her bundle and helped him put it on carefully over his raw back. I have a horse waiting by the south fence, she whispered, and food and water for a few days. Leaning heavily on her, Isaiah made his way out of the shed and into the night. The plantation was quiet, most of its inhabitants asleep. They moved slowly, pausing at every sound, until they reached the shadow of a large oak near the south fence. Tied to the tree was one of the colonel's best horses, saddled and ready with bags attached. There's money sewn into the lining of the left bag, Caroline explained, and a map. Head north, staying off the main roads. The shopkeeper's name is written on the map, Jonathan Miller in Charleston. If you can reach him, he'll help you. Isaiah turned to her, overwhelmed by what she was risking for him. Why? He asked again. After everything you've been taught about people like me, why help me? Caroline reached up and touched his face gently, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Because you taught me to question everything I've been taught, she whispered. Because you showed me that the truest words aren't in books, but in hearts. Before Isaiah could respond, she stood on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was brief, forbidden, and sweeter than anything Isaiah had ever known. When she pulled away, her eyes were shining with tears and something else, determination. Go, she said. Live free. For both of us. Isaiah mounted the horse with difficulty, his injured back screaming in protest. Looking down at Caroline, he knew he would never see her again, never know what became of her or Thomas. The thought cut through him like a physical pain. Tell Thomas. He began, but words failed him. I'll tell him you're free, Caroline said. That you're out there somewhere, reading and writing and thinking of him. Isaiah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. With one last look at Caroline's face, memorizing every detail, he turned the horse toward the north and freedom. Behind him, Caroline whispered words he barely caught on the night breeze. The truth shall make you free. As Isaiah rode away from Rosemere Plantation, the pain of his wounds competed with the ache in his heart. He was leaving behind the closest thing to family he'd found since losing his mother. But he carried with him their most precious gift, the knowledge that even in the darkest places, human connection could transcend the boundaries of race and station. What Isaiah couldn't know, was that Caroline stood watching him long after he disappeared into the darkness, and that when she finally turned back toward the main house, her steps were lighter than they had been in years, despite the danger that awaited her. Because for the first time since she'd married Colonel Wexley, Caroline had made a choice entirely her own. She had chosen to see the humanity in a man the world told her was beneath her. She had chosen to help him find freedom, even if she could not find it herself. And as she slipped back into the silent house, her husband's snores echoing from upstairs, Caroline made one more choice: to continue what Isaiah had started with Thomas. To teach her son not just letters and words, but the truth about the world. That worth was not determined by the color of one's skin or the accident of birth, but by the content of one's character and the kindness in one's heart. Little did she know that her choice would have consequences beyond anything she could imagine. Consequences that would change not just her life and Isaiah's, but the lives of everyone at Rosemere Plantation. Dawn broke over Rosemere Plantation with an angry red sky. Caroline had barely slept, returning to her bed only a few hours before sunrise after helping Isaiah escape. Her heart raced each time she thought of what she'd done. Not just helping a slave escape, but the forbidden kiss they'd shared in the darkness. The plantation erupted into chaos when the overseer discovered the empty storage shed. Colonel Wexley's roar of rage echoed across the grounds as he stormed through the house, his face purple with fury. "Where is he?" he demanded, bursting into Caroline's bedroom without knocking. She had prepared for this moment, rehearsing her response throughout her sleepless night. With just the right amount of confusion and fear, she sat up in bed. "Who? What's happening, Abram?" "The slave. Isaiah. He's gone. And so is my best horse." Caroline's hand flew to her throat in feigned shock. "Gone? How is that possible? Wasn't he locked up?" The colonel's eyes narrowed, studying her face for any sign of deceit. "Someone helped him. Someone who knows this house and has access to the stables." "Surely you don't think I had anything to do with it," Caroline said, forcing indignation into her voice. "After what he did, coming into our home, filling Thomas's head with dangerous ideas?" For a terrible moment, the colonel continued to stare at her. Then he turned away, his attention shifting to more immediate concerns. "I've sent riders in all directions," he said, "and I've notified the slave catchers. They'll find him, and when they do, he'll wish he'd never been born." Caroline kept her expression neutral, though her stomach twisted with fear for Isaiah. "What about Thomas? He's been asking for his breakfast. Keep that boy away from me today, the colonel snapped. His defiance yesterday was the last straw. When this is all settled, we're sending him to that boarding school in the north. He needs discipline that you clearly can't provide. With that, he stormed out, leaving Caroline alone with her thoughts. Sending Thomas away had always been the colonel's threat, but now it seemed he meant to follow through. The thought of losing her son sent a wave of panic through her until she realized something important. Thomas would be safe in the north, away from his father's cruelty and the poisonous environment of the plantation. Perhaps this was for the best. Downstairs, the house was in disarray as the colonel organized search parties. Caroline found Thomas in the kitchen, his young face solemn as he listened to the house slaves whispering about Isaiah's escape. "Mama," he said when he saw her, "is it true? Did Isaiah run away?" Caroline knelt beside him, aware of the servants listening nearby. "Yes, it's true. Your father is very angry. You should stay out of his way today." Thomas nodded, his eyes too serious for a 10-year-old. "Is Isaiah going to be all right?" "I hope so," Caroline whispered, unable to lie to her son. "Now come, let's have breakfast in the garden room." As they ate, Thomas was unusually quiet, pushing food around his plate without eating much. "What are you thinking about?" Caroline asked gently. "Isaiah told me once that freedom begins inside," Thomas said. "I didn't understand what he meant then, but I think I do now." Caroline glanced around nervously, making sure no one could overhear. "What do you think it means?" "That even if someone can control where you go or what you do, they can't control what you think or what you believe." Thomas looked up at his mother, his eyes bright with understanding beyond his years. Isaiah was a slave, but he was free in his mind. That's why he could teach me things nobody else could. Tears pricked at Caroline's eyes. In that moment, she saw Isaiah's legacy already at work in her son, a legacy of questioning, of seeing beyond the rigid boundaries of their society. "You're a very wise boy, Thomas," she said softly, "and you must be very careful with that wisdom." The search for Isaiah continued for days, then weeks. The colonel became increasingly frustrated as each search party returned empty-handed. The slave catchers, usually so effective, found no trace of him on any of the roads heading south or west. He must have gone north. The colonel raged one evening, pacing his study with a glass of whiskey in hand. Only a fool would go north. Every patrol and bounty hunter between here and the Ohio River will be looking for a runaway. Caroline said nothing, silently praying that Isaiah had made it safely to Charleston, to the shopkeeper who might help him on his journey. As the weeks passed, the colonel's obsession with finding Isaiah gradually gave way to other concerns. The plantation needed managing, and there were political matters that demanded his attention in Charleston. His trips away from Rosemere became more frequent again, to Caroline's relief. During his absences, she began to secretly continue Thomas's education. Using the skills she'd learned from watching Isaiah, she taught her son reading, writing, and mathematics. But more importantly, she taught him to question the world around him. "Why do we own slaves, Mama?" Thomas asked one day as they sat in the evening room, the same room where Isaiah had once taught them both. Caroline hesitated, knowing how dangerous such conversations could be. "Because that's how things have always been done in the South," she said carefully. "But is it right?" The simple question hung in the air between them. Caroline looked into her son's earnest face and made a decision. "No," she said softly, "it isn't right, but saying so out loud can be very dangerous." Thomas nodded solemnly. "I won't tell anyone you said that. It'll be our secret, like the lessons with Isaiah. Summer turned to fall, and fall to winter. The colonel made good on his threat and arranged for Thomas to attend a boarding school in Massachusetts, beginning the following spring. Rather than fighting the decision, Caroline embraced it, secretly glad her son would be away from Rosemere's poisonous influence. "You'll get a fine education there," she told Thomas as they looked over the school's brochure together. "And perhaps you'll see things differently than they are here." Thomas understood her meaning. "I'll write to you every week," he promised, "and I'll remember everything Isaiah taught me." The night before Thomas was to leave for school, Caroline found him sitting on his bed, holding something in his hand. "What's that?" she asked. Thomas opened his palm to reveal a small carved wooden horse. "Isaiah made it for me," he said. "He gave it to me the day before Father found out about our lessons." Caroline sat beside him on the bed. "You miss him, don't you?" "Every day." Thomas's voice was small. "Do you think he's safe?" "I believe he is," Caroline said, hoping with all her heart that it was true. "Isaiah is smart and brave. If anyone could find freedom, it's him." "When I grow up," Thomas said, "I'm going to change things. I'm going to make sure nobody gets whipped for teaching someone to read." Caroline put her arm around her son, holding him close. "I believe you will," she whispered, "and Isaiah would be so proud of you." The next morning, Thomas left for his new school, clutching his small bag of belongings, including the wooden horse hidden safely inside. Caroline watched the carriage disappear down the long drive, her heart both heavy and hopeful. She would miss her son terribly, but she knew this was his chance to grow up away from the Colonel's influence, to become the man Isaiah had glimpsed inside the curious, kind-hearted boy. With Thomas gone, life at Rosemere became increasingly lonely for Caroline. The Colonel, when he was home, barely spoke to her except to give orders or criticize. The memory of Isaiah, his gentle voice, his patient teachings, and that one forbidden kiss sustained her through the empty days. She began to secretly read books from the Colonel's library, educating herself in history, philosophy, and science. Each new idea, each new piece of knowledge felt like a small rebellion, a continuation of what Isaiah had started. Spring arrived, bringing with it letters from Thomas, full of excitement about his new school and the different way of life he was experiencing in the North. Caroline treasured these letters, reading them again and again in the privacy of her room. In one letter, Thomas wrote, "There's a teacher here named Mr. Franklin who reminds me of Isaiah. He tells us that education is the path to true freedom and that ideas can change the world. I told him about my friend who taught me to read, though I didn't say who he was. Mr. Franklin said that teaching someone to read is one of the greatest gifts one person can give another." Caroline wiped tears from her eyes as she read those words, imagining Isaiah somewhere in the North, perhaps teaching other children as he had taught Thomas. Meanwhile, the Colonel's political ambitions grew. He spent more and more time in Charleston, leaving Caroline alone at Rosemere for weeks at a time. These periods of solitude became her refuge, allowing her to read freely and write long letters to Thomas without fear of discovery. In the slave quarters, Isaiah's escape had become a whispered legend. Elias, who had been Isaiah's friend, sometimes caught Caroline watching the northern horizon, as if expecting someone to return. "He made it," Elias said to her one day, when they were momentarily alone near the stables. "I feel in my bones. Isaiah is free." Caroline was startled by his directness. "I pray you're right," she said simply, neither confirming nor denying her role in the escape. Elias nodded. "He changed things here, you know. Changed how some of us think about ourselves." "He changed me too," Caroline admitted softly. Years passed. Thomas grew from a boy into a young man, returning to Rosemere only for brief visits during which he and his father clashed constantly over politics, education, and the increasingly divisive issue of slavery. "Times are changing, Father," Thomas argued during one particularly heated dinner. "The whole country is debating this issue. You can't pretend the old ways will last forever." "You've been poisoned by those northern schools," the Colonel retorted. "I should never have sent you there." "No, I've been educated," Thomas shot back. "There's a difference." Caroline watched these arguments with a mixture of pride and fear. Pride in the strong, principled young man her son had become, and fear of her husband's growing anger toward him. During Thomas's final year at university, news arrived that shook Rosemere to its foundations. Colonel Wexley suffered a stroke while in Charleston, dying before Caroline could even reach the city. The funeral was small and somber. Few mourned the Colonel genuinely, though many came to pay their respects to one of the area's wealthiest plantation owners. Thomas returned home from school, now a tall, serious young man of 20. "What will you do now?" Caroline asked him the day after the funeral as they sat in the evening room. the same room where Isaiah had once taught them both. "I'm selling Rosemere," Thomas said firmly, "and freeing the slaves." Caroline stared at him in shock. "Can you do that?" "Father left everything to me, with provisions for your care, of course," Thomas explained. "I've already spoken with a lawyer in Charleston. It can be done." "Your father would be furious," Caroline said, a small smile playing at her lips. "Yes, he would." Thomas didn't seem troubled by this thought. "I've been offered a teaching position at a school in Pennsylvania. I'd like you to come with me, Mother." Leave Rosemere? Leave the South? The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. "There's nothing for either of us here anymore," Thomas said gently. "And in Pennsylvania, you could have a new life. Freedom from all of this." Freedom. The word echoed in Caroline's mind, bringing with it memories of Isaiah and his quiet dignity, his belief that knowledge could break chains. "Yes," she said, making her decision. "Yes, I'll go with you." The process of selling Rosemere and legally freeing the slaves took nearly a year. Some of the older slaves, including Elias, chose to stay on as paid workers for the new owners. Others took their papers and headed north, carrying with them Isaiah's legacy, the belief that freedom began in the mind but didn't end there. Before leaving Rosemere for the last time, Caroline visited the stables where she had first watched Isaiah teach Thomas. The building was empty now, the horses sold along with the rest of the plantation. But the memories remained, the secret lessons, the whispered stories, the moment when she had first seen Isaiah as a man rather than a slave. "We're leaving for Pennsylvania tomorrow," she said softly, as if Isaiah might somehow hear her words. "Thomas is going to be a teacher, and I'm going to learn how to live freely." As she turned to go, something caught her eye, a faint marking on one of the stable posts. Moving closer, she saw that it was writing, carved small and deep into the wood. "Freedom begins inside." Tears filled Caroline's eyes as she traced the letters with her fingertips. Isaiah had left his mark, not just on the wood, but on all their lives. The next day, Caroline and Thomas left Rosemere forever, traveling north to Pennsylvania and a new beginning. The journey was long, taking them through towns and cities Caroline had never seen before. As they crossed into the free states, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, the weight of the life she had lived for so many years, bound by rules and expectations as surely as the slaves had been bound by their chains. In Philadelphia, while Thomas arranged their final travel to the school where he would teach, Caroline visited a small bookshop. As she browsed the shelves, she overheard a conversation between a shopkeeper and another customer. "Have you seen the new Freedman's Journal?" the customer was asking. "There's a remarkable article in it by a former slave turned teacher. Isaiah Freeman is his name, I believe." Caroline froze, her heart pounding. It couldn't be, and yet the name— "Ah, yes, Mr. Freeman's writings are quite popular," the shopkeeper replied. "He teaches at a freedmen's school in Ohio now, I understand. Quite the advocate for education as the path to true equality." With trembling hands, Caroline purchased a copy of the journal. There, on the third page, was an article titled "The Power of Letters" by Isaiah Freeman. The words blurred before her eyes as emotion overwhelmed her. She sat on a bench outside the shop to read, her fingers tracing the printed words as if to confirm they were real. "I was taught to read in secret," the article began, "by a mother who believed knowledge was worth dying for. Years later, I passed that gift to a young boy who saw me as a person when others saw only property. His curiosity and kindness reminded me that humanity transcends the artificial boundaries we create between us. Now, as I teach children born both in bondage and in freedom, I share not just letters and words, but the truth that education is the key that unlocks the mind's own chains." Caroline read the article 3 times, searching for any direct reference to Rosemere, to Thomas, to herself. There was none. It would have been too dangerous. But between the lines, in the careful phrasing and gentle wisdom, she heard Isaiah's voice as clearly as if he were sitting beside her. At the end of the article was a small note about the author. Isaiah Freeman teaches at the Wilberforce School for Freedmen in Ohio, where he emphasizes that freedom begins inside, but must be nurtured through knowledge, community, and courage. He was alive. He was safe. He was teaching others, just as he had taught Thomas. The knowledge filled Caroline with a joy so intense it was almost painful. When Thomas found her still sitting on the bench, tears streaming down her face, she silently handed him the journal. He read it quickly, his expression changing from curiosity to shock to wonder. "It's him, isn't it?" he asked softly. "It's really him." "Yes," Caroline whispered. "He made it. He's free." Thomas smiled, his eyes bright with emotion. "Should we try to find him? To let him know we're here?" Caroline considered the question, imagining the moment of reunion. Seeing Isaiah again after all these years, telling him how his teachings had shaped Thomas into the man he had become, perhaps even admitting the feelings she had carried in her heart since that night in the darkness. But then she thought of the danger such a reunion might bring. Isaiah had built a new life, a respectable position. Reconnecting with his past, with the white woman who had once been his mistress, could jeopardize everything he had worked for. "No," she finally said, "but perhaps you could write to him someday, when you're established as a teacher, from one educator to another." Thomas nodded, understanding. "I'll tell him that his lessons didn't end when he left, that they continued through you, and now through me. And I'll read everything he writes," Caroline added, "and know that somewhere he's doing exactly what he was meant to do, teaching others that freedom begins inside." As they continued their journey to their new home, Caroline kept the journal close. That night, in a small and along the road, she took out a piece of paper and began to write a letter she knew she would never send. "Dear Isaiah, the truth did set you free, just as you always believed it would. And in your freedom, you set us free as well. Thomas from his father's narrow vision, and me from a life of quiet desperation. You taught us both that the most powerful chains are those we accept in our minds, and that true education is not just about letters and words, but about seeing the world as it could be, not just as it is. Thomas is a teacher now, carrying your legacy forward to a new generation. And I am learning, day by day, what it means to live with an open heart and mind. Somewhere in this vast country, you're doing the same. And though our paths may never cross again, I find comfort in knowing that the same stars shine over both of us, and that the words you carve into both wood and hearts remain true. Freedom begins inside. With eternal gratitude, Caroline." She folded the letter carefully and placed it in the journal. She would keep it always, this tangible connection to the man who had risked everything to teach a boy to read, and in doing so, had taught his mother to question, to challenge, and finally, to change. In Ohio, as Caroline wrote her unsent letter, Isaiah Freeman stood before a classroom of eager faces, children and adults who had known bondage and were now learning to embrace freedom. On the wall behind him, painted in his own careful hand, were the words that had guided him from Rosemere to this moment. "The truth shall make you free." And as he began the day's lesson, he thought briefly of a pale, serious boy and his troubled mother, hoping they had found their own path to freedom, and that somewhere, perhaps, they remembered him too.